Hi. Hello, this is Doug Roper, and I'll be bringing the Sunday school lesson today from Southside Baptist Church. And today we're going to be talking about the sign of His glory. And actually, this is going to be Jesus' first miracle that He performed in Cana, which is in Galilee. So, and when you think about that, a lot of times, if we're not careful, when we glorify God, sometimes it can seem so routine, that we just assume we're doing it. Okay, but that's not true, and especially it's in moments when everything is going the way we want it to, but God's involvement is always involved in our lives if we're a child of God. If we've trusted into Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, He's always involved in our lives, and He wants what's best for us. But this week, we're going to see a time when a powerful miracle occurred at a wedding. Many people didn't recognize how it happened. And in the moment, Jesus didn't use this event as a platform to put the spotlight of the results of the miracle, okay? He wanted to keep this one to Himself. It said it was an opportunity to reveal His power and glory, but it was more so for His disciples at that time. And it said this miracle, of course, would begin Jesus' public ministry. So let's open up with a word of prayer and then go from there. Heavenly Father God, we just come to You today, Lord. Thank You so much for the warmth of the sunshine You've given us, Lord, and thank You for the rain we're supposed to get later tonight. God, You know what we need, so thank You for that. But Lord, especially today, I pray as I go through this lesson, Lord, that You will speak in and through me. It will be Your words, not mine, that I will share this lesson in a way that brings glory to You. And also, God, I would just like to lift up those that are struggling with the wildfires, Lord, in California, and all those that lost their property and those who even lost their lives. Be with the families of those, Lord, and just continue to let them know You're there. Let them know You care. And just enfold them in Your arms and give them a comfort and peace that only You can. Thank You so much, God, for everything You have done and for everything that You're going to do. And I pray all this in the name of Your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, He took His disciples to a wedding. Now, this wedding, His mother was in attendance there, and we find out as we read more of these verses that I think she was more than just in attendance. I actually think she was actually helping to do things. But anyway, weddings during Jesus' time were not just an event that happened over one day or two. These things were week-long celebrations. They could have even been longer depending on, how many people came, how wealthy the bridegroom's father was. But the families hosting the weddings always made sure to have plenty of food and plenty of refreshments that were available for those who attended. Wine during this time was consumed in the celebrating. It was more of a natural drink that they had, because basically that was about all that they had to drink other than water. And, water wasn't always the cleanest. So with that being said, we can understand how this unfolds. But I want you to think about in your own life, in our lives, we can both have healthy and unhealthy hopes and expectations. And unfortunately, we can even have an unhealthy expectation for Jesus. We can see Jesus as someone who should simply fix all our problems. But we know that's not going to happen. Because Jesus said, they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. And He also says, come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But we can see that when we see Jesus as someone that should be able to access our own self-centered purposes. See, when the answer to prayer doesn't happen the way we expect, or we don't get the results that we desire, questions or doubts may arise about whether Jesus truly is who He says He is. But healthy expectations are grounded in truth. And we must see Jesus for who He is. He is the one who came to earth with a far greater purpose in mind that points ultimately to His authority. We may not understand how God is working in a situation, but we learn to trust in His plans and in His timing. And we should also do what Jesus wants us to do. So we're going to start with chapter 2. We're in John, chapter 2, 1 through 4. And we're going to start on the third day. A wedding took place in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and His disciples were invited to the wedding as well. When the wine ran out, Jesus' mother told Him, "They don't have any wine." And then Jesus answers her and says, "What has this concern of yours to do with me, woman?" Jesus asked, because He said, "My hour has not yet come." And this kind of lets you know that she was more involved than just somebody attending the wedding, because He says, "What has this concern of yours to do with me?" So the setting here, let's back up. Setting, it says here, is mentioned only in the Gospel of John. Cana means a place of reeds or rest. It says excavators indicate the population to be about 1,200. By contrast, it says other nearby villages, they had a strong Jewish population, but the other village only reached about 400. So this was a pretty big village at that time. And archaeologists also excavated stone jars from the site, and each one held about 20 to 30 gallons. Now think about this, 20 to 30 gallons, that is a big jar. And it's a stone jar, which is significant, and we'll talk about that too in just a minute. See, this miracle here served a dual purpose. It says that first, it introduced the miracles or signs that John recorded in his gospel. John's gospel obviously would include others, but this was the first sign that Jesus performed in Cana. And the miracle also revealed Jesus' glory, and it caused His disciples to believe in Him. If they believed because of this miracle, then we too should be able to see His glory and believe in Him. So it starts with verse 1, and it says the third day. So the third day here, John was talking about here, was saying the wedding took place on the third day of the week, which had become a Jewish tradition. So that would have been Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So it says the third day of creation was unique. Twice God declared it to be good, and that was back in Genesis 1, verse 10 and 12. During that day in His creation, He said twice that it is good. So the Jews wanted to be doubly blessed. So they thought if they had that on the third day, then they would be doubly blessed. Well, again, Jewish weddings in the first century were a week-long celebration that could last even longer. Depending on how wealthy the groom's father was, because the groom's father paid for the wedding, chose the date, and it says a trumpet, they called it a shofar, marked the beginning of the wedding. Someone would blow the trumpet. It says the groom would then bring the bride from her house to his house, or his father's home, and then the procession was marked by music and singing as they made it back to the bridegroom's father's house. So it says in verse 2 that invitations, to a Jewish wedding came in two parts. It says the first indicated the date, and recipients were expected to RSVP. In other words, they had to respond and say they were coming. Well, the second invitation arrived when the food was ready and the festivities were about to begin. Now, when we get to verse 3, where Jesus' mother, Mary, says to Him, the wine ran out. Okay? Now, in this culture, this was based on displaying honor and avoiding shame. And running out of wine would have been a huge social blunder. It says it could ruin the family's reputation and also their standing in the community for the rest of their lives. So the blunder could also result in legal action. The bride's father, could bring charges against the groom's family, for not fulfilling their promises or obligations and shaming their daughter. So they put a lot of weight on this, on a wedding, and who paid and who furnished what. So then Jesus says, when Mary, his mother, says they're out of wine, Jesus in verse 4, he says, "What has this concern of yours to do with me?" Now, Jesus here used this phrase, may indicate, like I said, that Mary had more of an official role at the wedding. You know, she may have been a family friend who was merely assisting with the food, or she may have been responsible for catering this week-long festivity. If either of these were true, running out of wine would be a major concern for Mary. So when Jesus calls her woman, when he says, "What has this concern of yours to do with me, woman?" this was not out of disrespect. And this only appears 2 times in John, and that's here and then at the cross. You remember Jesus used this term when he entrusted Mary to John. He said, "Woman, here is your son. Son, here is your mother," when he turned her over to John to look after her when he was being crucified. So Jesus said, "Woman, here is your son," and that's in John 19:26. And the woman was not, it says here, was not a title Jews commonly used when addressing their mothers, but it was not a term of disrespect or contempt. It says here that it could be comparable to us saying "ma'am." You know, like we say "yes, ma'am," you know, when we talk to our mother and others that we respect. "My hour," Jesus says in verse 4, "my hour has not yet come." This theme is woven throughout John's gospel, and the term refers to Jesus being glorified in his death, burial, and his resurrection. But this statement here meant that it was not time for him to reveal his glory, his full glory. That would come later. You know, but this miracle did reveal his glory, meaning his divine power. And we'll get into that and talk about this. And I really like this because Mary jumps on this and she doesn't complain. She doesn't nag about Jesus' response. The matter was going to be out of her hands one way or the other. And with Jesus being present, he would either do something or he would take care of it or he wouldn't. That was out of her hands. But if he decided at the moment to perform a miracle or not, that would still be to the glory of God. And she trusted Jesus. You know, when we consider the order of the events of the wedding, we can see that a problem had been identified. They ran out of wine. And when Mary went to Jesus, then the issue was no longer in her hands. The focus was placed rightly on Jesus, as it should have been. And he understood the public implications and the embarrassment of not having enough wine would cause to this family at the wedding. So Jesus also understood the solution. He said it could be handled in private. He was going to seek the Father's will, and he always wanted to make sure that God received the glory. So now let's read John 2:5-8. She says, "Do whatever he tells you," his mother told the servants. Now 6 stone water jars had been set there for Jewish purification, and we'll talk about this. Each contained 20 to 30 gallons. It's a lot of water. Those are big jars. And Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." It says, so they filled them to the brim. Then he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the head waiter." And they did. Now this is where it gets really good. First of all, let's talk about the servants. They didn't waver when asked to simply go and get the water. They obeyed what Jesus told them to do. It said the servants didn't question how a miracle was going to happen, especially when the solution seemed beyond logic to be able to achieve. So the servants didn't complain when they were given a big task to complete. Remember, 6 jars, okay, 20 to 30 gallons each. And the servants took on a certain level of risk by taking this substance to their boss because they trusted in Jesus. They trusted him to do something. They didn't know what he was going to do, but they trusted him to do something. So we're going to see here as we go on that we should see God's glory through Jesus, Jesus' glory, through what he does. The servants did what Jesus told them to do. Do whatever, Mary tells them. This statement also to the servants here indicates Mary was more than just an observant guest. Do is a command. And the only way Mary would have had authority to give this directive would have been if she had an official role at the wedding. Otherwise, these servants would have had no compulsion to obey an order that was given to them by a woman. They would have been answerable only to a member of the groom's family if Mary had no official role. Mary's statement here is kind of a precursor to something Jesus taught to his disciples when he said, "You are my friends if you do what I command you," in John 15:14. See, Mary fades from the scene after giving this directive. John here is making a plan that the focus was not on the wedding, or he was making plain, not making the plan. He was making plain that the focus was not on the wedding or the crisis or even Mary, but it was on Jesus. Now let's talk about these 6 stone water jars. This is important because 7 stood for, in the Jewish number, for perfection. 6 then represented something imperfect. The water was for Jewish purification. The miracle focused on how imperfect the old Jewish system of purification and cleansing was for sinful people. Second, the wedding involved a wealthy family, obviously, because they had 6, these are 6 carved stone jars. They are much more expensive than clay or ceramic ones. Having 6 was a display of abundant wealth. And third, this was a large wedding, so they needed it. And fourth, the wedding here involved a religiously observant Jewish family. So it's maybe even a family of a priest who served at the temple. We don't know that. They just said maybe, possibly. The family was obedient to the Old Testament, though, to the law where it stated clay jars were susceptible to contamination. So then the Jews used these stone jars to avoid uncleanness. And these, of course, like I said, they got to be heavy in themselves because they're carved out of stone. So as we go in and we talk about these were set for Jewish purification, as it tells us in verse 6, this called for persons to wash their hands before and after eating, and wash the cups, the pitchers, the kettles, even where they dined. And that would have been used at a meal, a feast, or a religious observance. And having them likely meant nearby there was a dining hall or a place where they all sat to eat. The water was dipped out of the jars and poured over the hands and utensils for some ceremonial cleaning. See, Jews in the first century took purification regulations seriously. Jewish teachings had been gathered for hundreds of years. They were finally put into writing in a form that was known as the Talmud. Now, this was after the time of Jesus, but it says its teachings would have been known and practiced in his lifetime. It says the Talmud has 30 chapters on purifying various vessels and 4 on the cleansing of hands. 4 chapters. Okay, this is kind of ironic anyway. But Jesus tells them, fill the jars. 20 to 30 gallons each. 6 stone jars would have totaled 120 to 180 gallons. Just think about the task it would take to fill. They either I would say they left the jars, they went and got water and brought it to the jars, because if they tried to move those jars after they filled them, that'd have been a lot of weight. So that's just my assumption. It doesn't say, but what Christ is telling them here to fill the jars, the task, it says here, would not have been a simple one. It says it would have taken numerous trips to the spring or the cistern that supplied the city's water. And the task could have taken hours rather than a few minutes. When they said they filled them to the brim, I love this part because it says, what Christ was offering would lack nothing. See, if the new system was an expression of his grace, his mercy, and his forgiveness, it would be dispensed by a dump truck load rather than just a thumb-sized measures. You know, Jesus saves to the uttermost. That's in Hebrews 7, chapter 7, verse 25. Now we're going to talk about the head waiter, it says in verse number 8. You know, this word appears only in this verse and the next, where it says, you know, Jesus told him, then he said, draw some and take it to the head waiter, and he did, and then the head waiter's response we'll get to in just a minute. But that's the only two times that this is mentioned. And it says the Greek translated literally means ruler of the table. It could have been a volunteer. Could have been someone in the groom's family hired to cater the wedding. But his role was something of a combination of the master of the ceremonies, the chief steward, and the head waiter. He was responsible for overseeing the servants, making sure everyone had plenty of food and drink, and part of his job was evidently to be the taste tester for anything that was served at the wedding. Now this is kind of ironic because it was his responsibility to make sure everyone had plenty of food and drink. Obviously, he didn't plan very well because they ran out way early. So now we're going to talk more about this. You know, often we can struggle to see answers to the questions that we face in life, but we're going to talk about the head waiter first. So in John chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, when the head waiter tasted the water after it had become wine, he didn't know where it came from, though his servants who had drawn the water knew. He called the groom and told him, everyone sets out fine wine first, then, after people are drunk, the inferior. But you have kept the fine wine until now. You see, Jesus did this. And this was his first miracle, his first signs in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory. It says that Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, this is kind of interesting because we're going to talk about the confusion that was brought about by the questions of the head waiter here. It said first, he questioned the source. Okay, but the source was the wedding, was either the groom or his father. And he questioned the wrong people when he questioned them. And he questioned the purpose, like, why did you wait till now? You know, he had no idea, okay? And so for us, we often question the source of our challenge that we're going through. You know, we wonder, maybe is God upset with us? Did we do something wrong? How about the famous why me? Well, my answer to that is why not you? Look what Jesus went through for us. Look what he never committed any sin. He was beaten. He was flogged. He was spit upon. He had a crown of thorns put on his head. He was whipped. And he was taken to the skull, as they called the mountain. And there he was crucified. So with that being said, you know, we may get advice sometimes from the wrong people when we're trying to figure this out. And we may even go to those who haven't even seen God's work in their own lives. You know, how can you go to someone who's never seen God's work in their own lives and ask them why this is happening to me? You know, and we question the purpose of the trial. Obviously, we all do. We hate going through trials. But we are. We are going to go through trials until we either die or Jesus comes first. So as a result, because of this, we can sometimes miss seeing the opportunity to let God work through us. You see, Jesus' work in our lives is for his glory, not for ours. So, after it had become wine, in verse 9, it says that the question here goes, when did the water become wine? Did it become wine when it was drawn from the stone jars, as the servants made their way to the head waiter? Did it turn to wine when he put it to his lips? This right here shows you that the focus of the story was not on the when or how, but on the by whom, which we know was Jesus. The servants knew, okay? The servants knew. And it says having servants also lets you know, servants, plural, not servant. You know, a lot of people had a servant, but servants said the groom's family was wealthy. And this was a large wedding with many guests. The servants knew, but the head waiter and the groom didn't know. They had no idea. See, the Messiah involved the least likely individuals, that's the servants, to do his kingdom work. And then, of course, once again, the head waiter, who doesn't have a clue, he says, "You've kept the fine wine until now," in verse 10. You know, his official words indicated three things. First of all, he was surprised at how good the wine was. The quality of the wine exceeded his expectations. Second, their tradition was for the best wine to be served first to make the biggest impact and impression early in the week. And so then the steward thought that the groom had saved the better wine until later. So he credited the groom with keeping the better wine until later. He never considered the possibility that this wine had been made available because of a miracle. So as we talk, and who knew about who made the source of the wine? Who knew this? Jesus did. He made it. And his disciples knew that he made it. Mary knew. She knew that he was going to do it even before it happened. She just told the servants, even after Jesus didn't tell her he would do it, she told the servants, do whatever he says. She trusted Jesus would take care of the situation. So Mary knew. Finally, the servants knew because they'd drawn the water and they had poured it into the stone jars. Who didn't know? The head waiter, he didn't know. The groom and his family didn't know. None of the guests knew. The wedding festivities continued uninterrupted thanks to the miracle Jesus performed. Now, why keep this miracle in the shadows? Because Jesus said at this point, he said, it's not my time yet. So he wanted to wait before he was made public with what he could do and what God had sent him to do. So Jesus' hour had not yet come. So, the first of his signs. This talks about the first of his signs. It lets us know it wasn't the only sign that Jesus would perform. Jesus' mighty acts are his miracles, that Jesus did. John puts on there that, he performed many signs, more than he could even put in the writing. But these were put there so that we could know and believe that Jesus was the Son of God. So, because this happened later, Jesus, when he came amongst among us, walked among us in human form, being God in the flesh, Jesus revealed and radiated the Father's glory. Glory refers to something that matters and it's substantial. His disciples believed. And like I said, near the end of the gospel, John talks about these many more signs, but he couldn't even put them all in the book because it couldn't contain them all. But it says that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, you may have life in that name. So it says here, it worked with these first disciples who were with him at the wedding of Cana, and they believed. They put their faith in him. Two of those who were with Jesus at the wedding were Andrew and an unnamed disciple. Now these used to be disciples of John. But Andrew's brother Peter was at the wedding, so was Philip and Nathanael. And it says they were Jesus' disciples. And Andrew and this unnamed disciples were now Jesus' disciples and followers of Jesus. They had seen the remarkable sign at Cana. And there were even greater signs that had not yet been seen that were going to happen, that they were going to be able to see and glorify God. We have sure hope because Jesus came to us. Sometimes if you're wondering, write down recent decisions, motivations, or actions taken in your life. Evaluate how you're using these things to glorify God and point the people to Jesus. Prepare the people for Jesus' work and for God's work in your life. Thank God